When I think of the word hood, I think of a person, a place, and perhaps even a thing. I'm Sir Creepsa, and welcome to Muhlenberg County Ghost Stories from the Hood. Tonight's tale of terror is entitled The Headless Track Traveler. Up until now, many of the stories that I've shared with you have either involved myself, my brother, or several of my friends from the hood. Tonight's tale of terror comes from someone else that's very, very dear to me. It's a story that I will never forget. The person whom I'm referring to is none other than my dear old pops. So, sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and be terrified by yet another Muhlenberg County ghost story from the hood. The railroad tracks in Central City that run by Gish Park have been infamous for involving sightings of a man walking them without an apparent face. I and my best friend Buzzy had the unpleasant experience of witnessing this on two separate occasions firsthand, one after the other, around the year 1985. So, upon hearing the story of the alleged headless man for the first time from my pops, I was completely blown away. How the unfortunate accident that decapitated the man came about was tragic, to say the least. According to Pops, all he knows is that there's definitely a mountain of truth behind it. But before I go any further, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share my videos. Also, click on the little bell icon and hit all notifications so that you can be notified each and every time I drop a new one. Having been a lifelong storyteller when it comes to the paranormal, and out of all the people that I've heard the pleasure of both listening to and sharing my stories with, I never would have imagined in a million years that my dear old pops would ever come to me with a story of his own. But boy, was I wrong. Born and raised in Central City, my pops was the next to the youngest child of a family in which he had 21 brothers and sisters. So many, in fact, that he would often tell me that he barely knew any of his older siblings. My pops told me on many occasions that when he was only 9 years old, he recalled that age very well, that his father would tell his mom on his way off to work to make sure that she looks after Wallace Ray, whatever she did. Pops told me that up to that day, during the winter months, his dad would always have him to help with getting the fire started in their stove, to heat up the house for the rest of the family. This was something Pops would tell me that he looked forward to doing every morning with his dad. Pops also told me that his dad would often fix a vinegar pie for he and his siblings, and that it always tasted good. But on this particular morning, when he bit into the pie, he quickly noticed just how bad this one tasted. It was actually the worst one that he ever made, Pop said. Pops was going to tell me that this day would sadly be the last time that he would ever see his father alive again. For later on that day, my Pops told me that the word would get back to his mama around 2 p.m. that her husband, my father's dad, had tragically gotten killed in a mining accident due to a cave-in. And Pops told me that it was told to his mama that had his father lived, due to the severe damage caused by the cave-in to his head, he more than likely would have lived the remaining part of his life in a vegetative state of mind. From that day on, Pops told me that he had no choice but to put on his big boy shoes and become a man. Several years after his father's death, Pops told me that he would marry his wife at 15 years old, and that he would also lose his mama a year later at the tender age of 16. Having been so young at the time, Pops told me that the going was very tough at first for he and his wife, that he would often have to take on 2 and 3 jobs at a time just to make ends meet, thus allowing him to be able to put food on the table and pay the bills. Pop said that the extra work was also necessary, seeing that the two of them would soon after have 2 daughters to provide for. These were stories that I heard many a time from my pops when I'd ask him about his childhood and having to be brought up around so many siblings. And each and every time Pop shared his stories with me, he would remember a thing or two that he had forgotten to mention to me the previous times before. This would all change in the year 2017, for it was around that time that Pop shared the story with me that I'm about to share with you. It was Thanksgiving Day 2017 when myself and my other 2 siblings were all just sitting around the table winding down after being overly stuffed from a fine meal that Mama had prepared for the family. By now, I had already shared a couple of my stories with my brother and sister, when Pops, who had stepped out of the room momentarily, would walk back into the room just in time to hear the final part of my 3rd story. At that point, he sat down and allowed me to wrap up the story. And then he began telling us a story dealing with the supernatural that involved himself and an older man that he grew up in the hood with, who went by the name of Mr. Ledberry. This took myself and my 2 siblings by total surprise, as we stared at Pops with this shocked look upon our face, for never once in our lives had we ever known Pops to talk about nor believe in anything remotely dealing with the supernatural. He had heard my stories dozens of times throughout my life, and never once did he ever comment or mention any of them until now. Pops would begin by telling us that both Mr. Berry and his wife, who I always knew as Mrs. Kelly, were born and raised in Central City. I personally only knew them for a brief time before they both passed, and as a matter of fact, they actually lived right down from us at the dead end of Railroad Street when I was a preteen. According to my pops, Mr. Ledberry was allegedly born with the ability to see through what is known as the veil, which in textbooks is described as a plane of existence on earth where ghosts, demons, hellhounds, as well as reapers dwell. This hidden talent allowed Mr. Berry to be able to pierce the veil, which in return gave him the means to be able to see supernatural things happening around him that others couldn't see. According to my pops, Mr. Berry had the canny ability to take his gift one step further, whereas he was able to allow whomever else that chose to be able to see his visions as well. All that was required was for the person to simply look over Mr. Berry's left shoulder, and they too were able to see what he saw. This blessing, or perhaps even a curse, depending on how everyone looked at it, was similar to the one that my grandmother had, who had this ability also, minus the part that allowed anyone else to see what she was seeing. Pops went on to tell us that Mr. Berry was a bona fide hustler around the hood, noting that he would often spend several hours out of the day just going around the neighborhood, as well as abroad, pushing his wheelbarrow, collecting cans, bottles, scrap metal, and whatever else he thought might bring him an honest dollar. On one particular stormy Saturday night, when my pop said that he was around 16 years old, he told us that after about 2 hours of extremely hard rain, it finally had died down some. Once it did, Pop said that he stepped outside and took a short walk up the street near Ebenezer Baptist Church. For some unknown reason, Pop said that he decided to cut through the alley that was located close to where Carol's laundromat was at the time. About halfway down the alley, Pop said he just happened to run into Mr. Ledberry, out of all people. By now, the rain had nearly come to a complete stop, as the two of them were approaching each other in the alley. Out of nowhere, my pops told me that Mr. Berry motioned for him to come closer towards him. Pop said that once he had gotten only a couple of feet away from him, Mr. Berry asked him if he wanted to see a man with no head. And if so, all he had to do was look towards the railroad tracks located by Gish Park, and once he did, he would then see a man coming from up underneath the parked train cars that were often left there on the spare set of tracks for weeks, and that this particular man wouldn't have a head. Of course, my pops told me that he didn't believe this for 1 minute, so he gladly accepted Mr. Berry's offer, and he went about doing exactly what he asked him to do. Immediately upon doing so, my pops said that he stood there nonchalantly, staring in the direction of the parked train cars for about 2 or 3 minutes. And then out of nowhere, there he was, as clear as day, slowly materializing as he came from underneath the train cars. And to Dad's disbelief, the man was exactly like Mr. Berry had described him to be, which was, in fact, headless. According to Pops, the man was a Caucasian who was told carried the last name Wilcox. Pops told us that he couldn't remember the man's first name, seeing that it happened so long ago. The man was supposed to have been allegedly gotten killed by a passing train due to his excessive drinking, which was something many of the older men did in the hood back in the day. And due to his drunken state of mind, he was met with an untimely death from passing out drunk and unconscious on the tracks. This horrifying sight scared the holy crap out of Pops, and according to Pops, he took off running back to his house as fast as he could in total fear of what had just happened and what he had just seen. When I asked Pops if he had ever seen the headless man again after that terrifying night, his reply was hell no, and thank God. But he also stated that he has unfortunately carried the memories from the events that happened to him that night with him throughout the remainder of his life. So, my advice to anyone traveling the tracks late at night near Gish Park, to do so with caution, especially if the railroad company decided to leave some abandoned train cars there for an uncertain amount of time. For you too just might have the unfortunate run-in with the Headless Man, aka the Track Traveler. Before I end this, I want to take this time and ask all of you that have taken the time to listen to my stories to please take a moment and say a prayer for my dear old Pops. Without getting into any details, just know that the prayers are definitely needed right now. I also want to thank everyone that has supported me from the beginning to continue to do so, and I promise to continue to bring you the stories as best I can. I'm Sir Creepsa, and until next time, stay terrified.